Welcome. This is A RAP CRITIC. I am your host, your boy Malik 16, the founder and creator of Plates and Crates. And no, I'm not a hustler, but I'm always a hustler. Yeah, we not about the incriminating of self on this channel. Matter of fact, mad people uptown are indeed hustlers. That's a throwback classic for everybody in Harlem who remembers Vault. Shout out to the whole Harlem. We used to have a store back in the day, a boutique store called Vault Harlem. It was on the west side and the east side. Shout out to the whole Harlem. And since we're throwing things back, I had to throw it so far back that yes, I even broke out the cornrows just for the album that we're talking about today, because it's that integral and that important to the year that we're talking about. So let me set the stage and set the scene for you a little bit. The year is 2006. The bloggers are slowly encroaching upon the territory that was once dominated by the go-to hip-hop websites. And at the front of this pack, leading the charge with the coverage and updates on this album, because the fervent anticipation and fandom surrounding it was at an all-time high, was XXL.com or XXLMag.com. And yeah, this is one of those albums that is one of the few that got an XXL rating in that magazine when it was released. We're talking about none other than the sophomore release by Clipse, Hell Hath No Fury. And yeah, this album was recorded between 2003 and 2006 in what became a heated battle between the rappers and the label, which at the time was Jive. And this was also the era of record labels collapsing and merging, because the game was indeed changing. All right, so we're gonna get into it. This is category 1, video 1, which means that we are going over the album itself. All right, before we go any further, if you have not already, take this moment to like and subscribe to the channel. This is episode 9, y'all. We almost getting to that dime. When we get to that dime, we're gonna switch it up a little. So tell a friend to like and subscribe. With no further ado, let's jump into it. Dimension 1, the quality of the production. Cannot talk about the Clipse without talking about the Neptunes. If not for the Neptunes, there would be no Clipse. I think most of us understand that. Anyway, Neptune's production. By this point in Neptune's commercial history and you know, notoriety, they had reached a space in the industry where they could do pretty much what they want, and that is exactly what is done on this album. There was a freedom and flexibility that was afforded for Chad and Pharrell to really experiment with sounds that people weren't used to hearing from them. They had surpassed being the laser sound guys. People knew that they had a range, but this was maybe the grittiest and most hip-hop production I think people had heard from them at this point. They're using sounds and real stripped down, back to basics kind of production. Real low synths, a lot of haunting sounds all throughout this album. You're getting deeper basses. On Clipse albums in general, you always get deeper basses than a lot of other Neptunes production. But on here in particular, I feel like there was more emphasis on capturing some boom bap feel. There's even, you know, some interpolations of like old BDP Boogie Down production work here. So you'll hear the BDP influence on songs like Right Around Shining, which sounds like an ode to the South Bronx. It uses some of those same vocal hits and punches in the same arrangement as the South Bronx. And then you'll also hear that influence on Dirty Money, which sounds like it was a nod to The Bridge Is Over with the melody and even the instruments used, the pattern that it's structured in. So much more of a hip hop feel, much more darker direction for the production. And you know, I think Chad and Pharrell are always deliberate about walking the fine line between catering to who they're giving the song to and bringing who they're giving the song to into a more creative world. It's like, let's see what you can do over this, but also let me not give you something that's completely hard to believe, right? So it was a field day for the Neptunes. I think it was a true showcase of just how creative they could be, how far they can go. You're getting everything from steel drums, harpsichords, accordion sounds, electro wave, new wave kind of sounds, maybe even some clavinets, and different hollowed out percussive instruments, unless you're getting those hard drum snares on songs like Mr. Me Too. Interestingly enough, Pusha had mentioned that a lot of the beats on this album were being made and created with Jay-Z in mind for his comeback, which we know later turned into the Kingdom Come album. And I thought that was really interesting when we consider that this album was worked on between 2003 and 2006. 2006 is the year that both Kingdom Come and Hell Hath No Fury came out, and Pusha talked about having some feelings about that, strong feelings about it towards Pharrell, and then those beats eventually winding up being used for this album, and it all just kind of came together and made sense. And it's interesting to imagine what Jay would have sounded like on these songs, or what songs he would have made out of them, especially considering that the Neptunes beats that did end up on Kingdom Come were heavily panned. People thought that those were some of the weakest songs on the album. So really interesting. And I remember when this was out, people either praising this album because of the creative Neptunes, complete full Neptunes production, or complaining that maybe they should have let their foot off the gas and let someone else produce a couple of the tracks so we can hear what Clipse sounds like after waiting so long, hearing what Clipse sounds like over other production. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 2, which is the question of, well, the cohesiveness of the sonic bed. How well did all these beats sound together? Now, this is a 12-song album, and you get songs that step out, even though the whole album is Neptune stepping out and showcasing new sounds. You get some songs like Trill, where you wonder, how does this fit with everything else? Trill tends to be one of those songs where it's an obvious and real distinct deviation from everything else that's going on the album. You could say the same thing about Nightmares, but Nightmares being the last song and kind of slowing and smoothing things out to take us down after this crescendo that was Chinese New Year, it almost makes sense. But Trill sounds like one of those songs that are cool standing alone as a single, but on the album, kind of hard to figure out where it goes. And, again, as much as we hate to compare albums to other albums on this channel, there seems to be a pattern when it comes to Clipse albums, that it starts off super strong, especially the first 4 to 5 songs always give you this great glimpse of what to expect from these two and from the Neptunes together, right? You always get your first 4 or 5 songs are super diverse and super high energy, and then somewhere in the middle it starts to low fall a little. Either you get worn down or tired from the content, or the beats just kind of lose some of their luster. And so I think by the time you get to Dirty Money, as experimental and nostalgic as you might appreciate it, you might feel like it's a weaker beat by the time you get to it. And Dirty Money's so basic, it sounds like it could have been made in the era that, the BDP songs were made, because it's, that first keyboard you get as a producer, or the first machine you get or program you get with those first sounds, and you're punching on a drum machine and making the beat as you go, or you're teaching yourself how to play a melody and it comes off very choppy and that's the best way to describe it. And like, if this was not Neptunes, I don't know if people would have let this beat fly at all. They would have really put this beat through the ringer if it wasn't the Neptunes, because it sounds very basic and very amateur. But because it's Neptunes, it comes off as genius. And it doesn't make for as much of a seamless mashing of these songs. Because this album was created over different years with different things, very different things happening in hip hop. We had the crunk era, we had the snap era, and 2006 was this kind of renaissance that happened. But from 2003 to 2006, you're getting a lot of variation in trends, in just direction of hip hop. And I think any album that was made over such a long span of time, you're gonna lose some of the gelling if the rappers and producers are not keen on that. If they're just thinking, oh, we got a bunch of individually hot songs. And I think that's what happens on this album. I think you got a lot of individually hot songs. I don't know how cohesively they come together as an album. Even though it's in that magic number territory, that 12 song being, you know, a safe space to be in, it just seemed like it was missing that gelling element. But something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, the question of, is there an intentional mood and tone here? So if I mentioned in the last dimension that there's something lacking, that kind of satisfying completion feel to it, I think it's because the only clear intentional mood here is, hey, we're back, we're mad that it took so long and other people tried to copycat us. I think that's kind of the only times that you hear the brothers on the same page. On this album, you start to get this clear divergence between what the brothers are prioritizing or what their focus is on, where Malice is the moral compass of the group. They both lament, but Malice really goes into more of a deeper dive in the self-reflection territory. And Pusha is clear that he's gunning for a spot here. He's gunning for his respect. He's coming more aggressively, and he wants people to know he's not holding back. He's welcoming all competition because he's coming for that top spot, whether as the best trap rapper, and we're not talking about trap music, we're talking about coke rap, right, which the brothers have been branded as doing, and also the best rapper, period, and the realest. So all these titles are what Pusha T is sniping at all throughout this album, where Malice is more coming from a place of, look at what we've done and I got my brothers back. Look at what we've done being both ways, right? Look at what we've done in a gloating way, and also look at what we've done in a regrettable way. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Let me know if you picked up on any other themes or tones. I don't think there's a space for a mood to be set by this album, just because the range of beats take you in so many directions that it's not this one looming mood at all. By the time you feel boom bap hip hop-ish, it gets electro and experimental. So really interesting, which takes us to dimension 4, the song distinction versus the repetition of words and sounds. We just pointed out how diverse all the production is on this album. Not a lot of room, not any room. You know, redundancy is a curse word for them. There's no repeated sounds on this album, you know. And then words. No, if I had to say anything about the Clipse when it comes to what they do on the mic, they do use very unique words and distinct language patterns. It almost becomes Shakespearean, the way they approach putting words together, and not Shakespearean in this idea, oh, they're great manipulators of the English language and they say all this deep poetic, you know, stuff. They speak different from other rappers. You know, they use kind of like biblical phrasing and word arrangement differently than a lot of other rappers. Sentences sometimes starting with a preposition or a pronoun in a certain place. I think very interesting stuff. So yeah, you're not getting a lot of redundancy or repetition of words and sounds on this album because they're so keen on using unique words and playing with language. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, the question of content versus the amount of songs. As I mentioned, there are 12 songs on this album, and that is a pretty safe number. You can really do a lot of recklessness on a 12-song album without getting called out, as long as you have like 1 or 2 songs where you're talking about something, you know, heavily, clearly, distinctly topical. You get one here. You get Nightmares And even in that song, you know, it's hard for both of the brothers to stay on topic or stay on the same page. And all throughout, as I mentioned, Malice seems to be the voice of reason and reflection. And they're really, you know, with the exception of Dirty Money and Nightmares, there's not a lot of variation between what they're talking about. This album is almost completely braggadocio and coke rap. So if you found something else different, if you found some more diamonds in the rough, one, I would probably accuse you of being a super fan and standing hard for Clipse, which is not uncommon when it comes to this group for some reason. But two, I'd say you surprised me. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, how much content was on this album versus how many songs there are, and, you know, does it tip the scales at all? Mention 6, features. Yes, you get features on here. The Neptunes helm all of the production here, but unlike the first album, Pharrell's presence is slightly toned down. I say slightly because he's on a lot of the backgrounds, a lot of the hooks. He does 2 guest verses on Mr. Me Too, but it's still not as overarching as his presence on the first album. Clipse really takes the front seat here, and Pharrell is used really cleverly here. He pops up just when you're like, oh, okay, I guess it's time for another Pharrell, you know, vocal on a song. Then you get the expected features from the rest of the Re-Up gang. And for some reason, you know, this is still that era where they kept trying to force this other Star Trek rapper, Roscoe P. Cold Chain, on us. And I don't think it ever caught on. Similar to Fan Lay, you know, Roscoe has a very distinct presence, but it just was never enough to garner or generate enough buzz or curiosity for his own projects. I don't know if his verses here helped any of the songs. Just like on the first album, I don't know if his presence took away or added. It's a very distinct voice. It's kind of cool to have his voice balance against the brothers, but his flow is it's either a love or hate kind of flow. If you don't get with the Roscoe P. Cold Chain dynamic, it could weigh a song down, because it's one of those Sadat X effects where you really have to like how different his presence is to get in on it. I can say the same about the other Re-Up gang members. Yeah, I don't know if Ad Lava ever brings anything special to the albums. I don't think his voice or his lines are at any other more pleasing level than the 2 brothers. You have Sandman, who I think out of all of the lesser known features stands out the most, because he at least uses his voice in a way that grabs more attention, and the lines are just a tad more clever. You know, he's floating in the same spaces as the 2 brothers, where you get the hook features like Slim Thug and Bilal, who really do add something that stands out on the album, just because they're unexpected features. It's a great contrast of different, and it goes well with the beat. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How much did you enjoy the features on this album? Do they change the quality of any of the songs for you? Do they raise them up, bring them down, or keep them neutral? All right. Dimension 7. Does the weakest song, or do the weakest songs on the album take away from the album? We mentioned when we were talking about the production, I say we meaning me, right? Talking about the production, how different a beat like Dirty Money and Trill make the album. But I also think what's done over those songs can be a takeaway, right? So if you're really not feeling the beat on either one of them, it's gonna be hard for you to get back into the zone when songs like Keys Open Doors and Chinese New Year come right after them. Some people may feel Ain't Ya is too simple of a beat. Some people really like the Mr. Me Too beat. Some people didn't. You can nitpick at the beats you don't like, but it really is important to consider what was done over the beats, and was it enough to tame that? Because sometimes you may not like the production aspect of a song, but what was done vocally is enough to salvage it. I think Trill swims in dangerous territory because it can almost be considered filler. I know there are publications at the time, like Pitchfork, that wound up considering that song one of the best songs of the year or of that era. Really interesting to see the write-ups about this album at the time. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go into the next dimension. But yeah, I could say, Trill and Dirty Money might be takeaways just because they seem the least inspired out of all the songs. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. I'd love to know what you all think are the weakest songs. Maybe you feel like there are no weak songs. It's a classic. Shut up about it, right? That takes us to Dimension 8. Mass Appeal. Despite the critical acclaim and pandemonium surrounding this album on the internets, on the webs, this album commercially did not perform. It didn't even go gold. Mr. Me Too got a decent amount of play. I remember going to parties and hearing it. It was on the radio. The video was pretty visually appealing and got a lot of buzz. There was a lot of talk about, some of the subliminal shots that were on that album. But that's about as far as this album went. You have songs like Dirty Money that I think were made with maybe more of a radio aesthetic applied to it, but just didn't get its wings. Ain't Ya, Trill, I think those were more singles-minded songs, but those also tended to be the least inspired songs, where it sounded like the brothers kind of took a knee and were phoning it in a little. And other than that, the 2 songs that were released as singles were unconventional for the time too. These didn't sound like they were primed to be mega hits anyway, the way that, on the first album you had songs that you could tell, all right, these were gonna have legs. Ma Don't Love Her was at least gonna get radio play. When's the Last Time was at least gonna get club play. But where did you see Mr. Me Too and Wamp Wamp What It Do going? And I like Wamp Wamp What It Do. That's one of my favorite joints, but these didn't have the obvious song structure of the day where the repeat factor was heavy, or the dance factor, or the Jeep factor. Mr. Me Too is almost a lo-fi kind of beat. We're talking about deep bass lines and this humming, sound that's carrying it mostly. It's a really lo-fi club song. The drums that come in and out of it is what keep it alive, but otherwise it would be a pretty mellow song, right? Wamp Wamp, we talk about the days of radio formatting, just don't know what radio market that was supposed to hit. Pusha also mentioned in an interview wanting the song Nightmares to be a single, but being very aware that this is not a single that they felt could carry them anywhere since it was so mellow. But then, comparing it to a single like Dreams by The Game, which came out, which was very mellow. But you gotta also keep in mind that when an artist is on fire, when a rapper is on fire, singles and chart-wise, they can get away with having a more subdued and understated single when they're on a roll. After you put out 3 big songs that are up-tempo, you can kind of sneak and get away with a mid-tempo song because you're riding a wave, you're riding a streak that you're on. And Clipse didn't have that streak. Pusha also says in an interview, he knew that this album wasn't going to be a mainstream darling, so they wanted to just kind of run with it and be free to have this hard-hitting and experimental sound. He used the word weird, which tells you that they understood. When they have beats like Trill and Dirty Money and even Mr. Me Too, they knew that they were stepping into territory that would be either loved or hated, but not maybe the biggest club bangers or radio hits. And he said mostly because they didn't expect much from the label at that point. They fought so hard, talked so bad, so much heated and soured relationships there. They just wanted to get it to the fans, and the emphasis became on appealing to their fan base, which they did. Their fan base became, stronger than ever. And so it's always great to have that awareness and not be disillusioned thinking that, these songs were going to be smash hits when you knew how unorthodox they were. I can dig it. These two were so focused on their rapping and their verse prowess that even though their hooks had gotten better, I just don't know if they had any super powered songs on here that would take this album any further than it went. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats takes us directly to dimension 9, 3 eyes. Impact, innovation, influence. Yes, as I mentioned, there was a fever pitch anticipation for this album in 2006. I used to visit the XXL comment board often, weekly, if not daily, and that would be the most talked about thing. Besides, Jay-Z's return to rap and people really wanting to trash him, this was, Clipse was the hot topic, and people were like, the same way in the era of the Locks trying to get off of Bad Boy and go to Rough Riders, and people were saying free the Locks. It was that same kind of temperament, that free the Clipse, let them off, release the album. And I think Clipse was egging that on. This is the MySpace era. There's a lot of discontent being spread against the industry by the Clipse, which I think at some points was hurting them more than helping them. And we've seen things like this. We've seen things like this play out with Lupe when he went against his label, when he was signed to Atlantic, and then we got Lasers, who people were petitioning for it, and when they got it, they hated it. So the fans seem to be suburban kids. The furthest removed from the lifestyle that Clipse were talking about is who seem to be so passionate about them, and it used to boggle my mind because their fan base was like full of stans who felt like they were the realest thing to hit hip-hop ever. And this was only bolstered by the fact that once Mr. Me Too came out, the video especially, we started getting all this buzzing about them taking shots at Birdman and Lil Wayne for apparently lying on their raps and jacking their style. And it's all fueled in the very first song on the album, Got It For Cheap. Pusha says, "I'm the greatest since he died and he lied," which is a direct shot at Wayne, who said, "I'm the best rapper alive." This was the start of more reason to talk on the internets about why they're the realists and who they're going at and how they, pioneered a style. There was definitely impact from the release of this album. You add the fact that this got an XXL rating when it was released, it almost validated all of the standing that happened for this album. And, it's become solidified as a classic because of that. I believe, people followed suit. They were so starved to hear them that when they finally heard them, it was like, One of the other factors that go into the impact is that Clipse were one of maybe like 10 rap acts that really led the pack when it came to these rapper-led mixtapes. The model that 50 really cemented as a creative engine, and really were able to gain so much steam and momentum off of them. Wayne, T.I., Dipset being some of the others who successfully took advantage of that era where you could do that before it got played out. When they started their Re-Up Gang series, it really kept their name alive, and it strengthened their buzz even harder through all of the label drama, because people were really waiting to hear what they sounded like over fresh original production. And it also broke up some of the monotony of the two brothers by having these two other rappers to contrast their voices. Really kept them alive and really built the anticipation. Now, innovation, you're gonna find the most innovation on the production. The production is where Chad and Pharrell really spread their wings and flexed their muscles. We're hearing sounds that we hadn't heard in hip hop, which further propelled and pushed the inspiration and just idea machine for hip hop in general to go further and do more. And from that, we got more experimentation right after that. It wasn't locked into one producer sound. We're getting producers coming out the woodwork after that. I don't know how much of that was directly inspired by that, but they added to that bowl of let's do more with our hip hop beats. And it also added this push to go back to some boom bap roots, which we hadn't heard in a while because everybody was complaining that hip hop went down south. Ironically, two brothers from the South by way of the Bronx, New York, brought back maybe the most Bronx, New York sounding music since Fat Joe. As far as influence, that's to be debated, right? They claim that they were heavy influence, the whole bait fashion phenomenon, some of the coke rap trends and jewelry, things that are kind of just outside my purview of knowing, things that kind of don't matter on wax so much, on recorded audio, but maybe more stylistically is where they claim to have the influence. You all can determine that for yourselves. If you saw any influence from Clipse permeating throughout the rap stratosphere, I would go on to say this act not being able to even go gold, I don't really know how far reaching their direct influence on the game was. Yeah, I was ignorant. I'm a hip hop historian. I'm a hip hop expert. I'm not an expert on all things in the culture. That's why we have this global hip hop community. Because you guys can fill me in and be like, Malik, you tripping. They were the leaders of this. They were the trendsetters for that. Let me know. So something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the final dimension, dimension 10. How creative, timeless, and unique is this album overall? Definitely the uniqueness factor is there because you've never heard Neptune's production like this. Up until that point, this stands out as a unique body of work just because one of those albums that were produced all by one set of producers, but showing a range of sounds. I would listen to the instrumental of this album, and I think most of you would, especially if you're a rapper that likes to freestyle, or the nostalgia value of it, because it was just so hard hitting. Now, standing the test of time, I do think you still get some of the sharpest phrases that people remember and quote. There's a really hilarious article, everything I learned about life, I learned from this album, from theringer.com. You can go look that up. So I do think the impact from the fans who were there, from the people in that era who were there for it, it lingers. If someone found this album today and discovered it for the first time, how classic and timeless would it be? I don't know. I don't know if anything new and different was being done on this album outside of the production. Nothing new is being said. The distinct voices of the brothers might stand out. You know, we saw the beginning of Malice kind of leaning in a direction where he was regretting even more, or really, you know, lamenting more than ever. I don't know. I wouldn't know how timeless or classic or unique this album is outside of the production. I really am at a standstill here. So I would love to know what you all think on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. How classic, timeless, and unique is this album? That completes and concludes our category 1 review. Yeah, join me for video 2 where we go over the rap performance on this album. Until then, F a rap critic. Talk about it while I live it. Word to mouth.